Hey, friend. Welcome to Ediscovery, from critique to change, sharing stories and expanding possibilities for the future of work in e-discovery, a podcast that brews up positivity and progress. I'm Becky, and along with my co-conspirators, Renee and Jill, we're here to pour out practical advice and inspiring conversations that illuminate what's really happening out in e-discovery land. In each episode, we'll uncover the truths and realities of e-discovery, shining a light on what's working, what needs improvement, and how we can drive meaningful change from the grassroots level. Our goal is to inform, uplift, and empower you with insights and strategies. Together, we can create a movement towards a more innovative, compassionate, and effective legal landscape. So grab your favorite cup, sit back, and let's infuse your day with positive energy and actionable wisdom. This is Ediscovery. Well, welcome back to our second episode of Ediscovery. We are very excited to be back to talk about e-discovery and, you know, the fun, wild, and rarely wonderful world that it is. So today, So today we're going to talk about suffering in the workplace. This is a heavy topic, and we want you guys to understand that, we know that a lot of suffering is happening in the workplace, and, it's happening everywhere in the world, but today we're just going to specifically talk about e-discovery PMing and in client services specifically, the suffering that can happen in this industry. So we thought it was important first to show you guys we're not just riffing. We are four people that go down rabbit holes of researching, and we have friends and community members that we're connected to that are very, are psychologists and organizational psychologists and wellness experts. So we say this to say, we're legal field people. We do our research. So we're going to go ahead and first define workplace suffering.
Can I clarify though, Becky? I do riff sometimes. I'm gonna riff. Yeah, just to
okay.
Sure
well, we do. However,
okay.
we do we have research that backs. We got receipts. Is what I'm saying.
Okay. Yes, we have.
You know what I'm saying? Okay.
We definitely have receipts.
So I'm going to read from an article that I found on the NIH website based on some research that was done by some psychologists. It's a research paper that was published. We will link some of these resources in the show notes. But this paper specifically it was published in Frontiers in Psychology, and it defined workplace suffering as a destabilizing psychological experience arising when employees run into insuperable and tenacious barriers after having used up all their valuable resources trying to improve a situation, looking for well-being in the workplace, or a better organization of work with regards to quality and safety. So this article, it cited specific sources of suffering, and this is just a short list. It did not cover all of the things, but some of those things that cause suffering are things like job insecurity, abusive supervision, stress, and this was a big one for me, techno stress. Had you guys ever heard of that? I hadn't. It's
No.
the stress caused by hyper connection to devices.
Reach.
So true.
Yeah, I'd take a sip on that one.
Workplace violence, red tape, poor personal relations, and opportunistic behavior, and role overload. And then it discussed some of the consequences of workplace suffering, to include things like underperformance and deviant work behavior, aka being an asshole at work. Or employee turnover, which we know that's true. I think one of the most, just pause for a second. I think one of the most interesting things that I experienced was when I got into e-discovery and I realized that people would quit their PM jobs to go to a new vendor just to get like a 3 month break because that 3 months is your ramp period when you're learning. And people literally would leave a job, you know, and take a new one just to get a break from caseload. That was like wild to me. I was like, okay, that seems like weird, but also red flag. So yeah, I don't know. The article is really interesting. It shed a lot of light on things, introduced me to some things I'd never heard of, like techno stress, which I that in my heart.
Mm.
Um, and then I wanted to also talk about like workplace suffering. I read another article on the American Psychology Association website. It was specifically a survey. It was a survey in 2023 that was done on workplace like suffering, workplace psychological health and well-being. And you know that it covered a lot of different topics, but one of the topics that stuck out to me was belonging.
Mm,
And it basically said that people who are in client facing roles typically are the ones who are like suffering the most and they feel the least amount of belonging probably because they're like facing these clients and they're basically all alone. And then I really found it interesting that, like, as they went up the chain in the survey, executives were the least likely to feel any lack of belonging because, I mean, I don't know, we could talk about why that is, but it seems like to me, maybe they're in an echo chamber, maybe they have
mhm.
support that the rest of the people don't. Um, you know, they're often I don't, in my experience, kind of self centered and they're really thinking about themselves and their own career. So they, you know, any kind of suffering that's showing up is getting ignored. So yeah, that, you know, I think like there are, and Jill, we've talked about this before, and I think, you know, you kind of gave me a different, you know, I like perspective on that. And it's kind of like, well, yes, they could be like, it could be because they're like sociopaths or just self-centered, Becky.
Self-centered.
Because you know, I gotta go fire. Like I'm going straight with the you're a sociopath or you're an asshole who treats people like garbage because all you care about is yourself, which you pointed out to me as like they're often in their own little container. Often it's maybe like an echo chamber, and you know, they're so far removed from the day to day, they don't actually have to talk to clients unless they, you know, on occasion, if it's an escalation or like if it's a situation where they're dealing with the people who are like causing the harm, because they're insulated from that. I don't know.
Mhm.
So that's my little like spiel, my research on workplace suffering. And I think like now what I'd like to do is I think we should pivot, because I think the research out there, the scientific evidence that I was able to find, like it definitely points to, you know, the suffering being caused by executives and their decisions or people running the organization. Um, but I think what we really want to talk about is like the ranges of workplace suffering. So I don't know if you wanted to go ahead and, you know, take it from there, Jill, to just give your riff
Yeah,
or your two
sure.
cents on it.
Yeah, I think first of all, I would say that suffering happens at all levels, right? I think, what we've seen in our experience is that even the people at the highest levels of the organization are not insulated from suffering. They are suffering in their own way. Maybe they don't feel a lack of belonging because, they're in a position of authority or power, if you will, and the people around them are appealing to them and, want to be on their good side and that sort of thing. But they are not insulated from suffering. Like we are all suffering. Everyone is suffering, and especially in e-discovery.
Yeah.
But I think the ways that it shows up can be different. So there's really overt ways that it shows up. Like we could talk about, and I think we will cover some of this today, some examples racism, sexism, verbal abuse, being cussed out, that kind of thing, bullying. Those are some really overt ways, even if they're like isolating in the sense that like maybe it's not like out there for everybody to see, right?
Mhm.
Like maybe it's only happening in a one-on-one basis, but it's overt. Like that is like those things cause suffering, like without question. And then, those are sort of like, I think, the more extreme examples of causes of suffering. And then it's kind of a range. And there's more like sort of covert ways of suffering, like, you know, how it feels, like you mentioned in the beginning, like how the techno, what did you call it? Techno
Techno
suff,
stress.
yeah, like
Techno stress, like tech
te-
stress.
techno stress,
Yeah.
how like suffering in the sense of like how it feels to be unable to like focus fully on your life outside of
Mhm.
work, right? How it feels to have a sense of I need to take my laptop with me to this family event because I can't be disconnected for that long, right? Like that causes suffering. How it feels to work long hours even when you're sick, even when you don't, like mentally you're not there, right? Like it's just really you're having a hard time but still having to show up. Being overworked, having more on your plate than what you can really handle and feel good about, right? So those are some of the ways that I think it shows up. And what the one thing I think is important to mention here is that there can be a tendency in this industry, and I've heard it from people's mouths, that their stress, their problems, their suffering isn't as important as somebody else's.
Mhm.
Somebody else has it worse, and therefore theirs doesn't matter. And like, I call bullshit on that, right? That's just not true. You don't have to have the worst experience in the world, right? To experience like some of the worst things that are possible to experience for you to like be suffering, right? You can still be in a state where you're suffering even if it's what you perceive to be minor.
Mhm.
I feel that one all up and through. Need to take a sip because that I connected with that. And I mean, can we talk about the origin of that, right? Uh, I I feel like, and here's me riffing now. Anybody watch the Emmys? What? Left
No.
turn. Okay, so watched
Fill
the
me
Emmys
in.
the
No.
other day,
Okay.
and Miss Jodie Foster, who's an older, awesome A-list actress, who I've been watching since like Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore and Taxi Driver, won an Emmy for her performance in True Detective. And when she gave her speech, she said that the experience was magical and it all comes from the top. And when she said that, immediately I was like, what? Because I think about where she is in her career and that she took the time to point out that if it's magical at the top, that means it stinks from the head as well. She went on to say that the experience was love, love, love. And when you feel that, something amazing happens. It's deep and wonderful. And she say older than this place and this time. And then went on to say love and work equals art. And I found that so profound. Part of the reason that suffering is so disconnected at the top, I believe, and in my experience, is a little bit of a lack of respect when you get to a certain level. If you were abused at work when you were at the bottom level, as you rise, it kind of becomes in e-discovery and in legal profession in general, at least in my experience, like a badge of honor or like a license to then crap on the people who were in the same position you were in when you were at their level, rather than understand and have empathy for those folks who had gone through something similar and say, you know what, because I have gone through something similar, let me not do the same thing to you. And I know in my own journey, I tried to do that. Um, but the lack of respect at the top was it's paralyzing, frankly. And if it was paralyzing for me at, higher levels in an organization, I can imagine that the lack of respect from, let's say, sales, believing that someone needs to be on camera for a meeting that a client calls last minute, for example, and the project manager says, you know what, I can't be on camera right now, but I will absolutely join this last minute call that nobody was expecting and that wasn't scheduled. For people high up in the organization to then say, they pay a lot of money to have you on camera. Like, this isn't OnlyFans, right? People don't pay to have project managers on camera. They pay for their expertise in the job that they were, qualified to do. And things like that is what makes people suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Feel like the next time that happens, whether or not I'm in the hospital room with my significant other, I guess I better find a quiet place and get on camera because people aren't going to tolerate me not doing so. Things like that come
Mm-hmm.
from higher levels in the organization, what they tolerate,
Mm-hmm.
the model that they emulate. We have to model better for
Mm-hmm.
people, period.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cat.
Yeah, I feel that. I don't, like, and I feel both. I think for me it was the more overt things that happened to cause the most suffering. But I also think like you could have like, I don't know, I think maybe the less overt, the hidden like suffering, that compounds more over a longer period of time. The overt is like a situation you can maybe push through it, or it's really bad, but it like eventually like it kind of goes away, right? And what I'm thinking about specifically for me was experiencing the only thing I can really call it is misogyny. And I would experience that like in multiple ways. Um, but the like situations would somewhat like does resolve and go on, but the longer term suffering was things like the techno stress. Be like, hi, I sleep. I don't know what's wrong with the rest of you people, but my butt's in bed at like 8:30. So if you think
Mm-hmm.
I'm like reading your emails when you're sending them to me at 10, I'm not seeing them until the morning. And if I'm going to get in trouble for not responding to an email that was clearly well past business hours, when in fact, maybe the client didn't care or expect me to respond right away. Like maybe they're a normal client or a normal person out here, like just trying to get their shit done. Maybe they have a dentist appointment and so they need to get this email out the way. But for me to like then get in trouble for not responding to an after hours email and like somehow get that put in my review or something, like those little things build up over time, and that's what caused me to start having blood pressure issues because I was and getting, having to be put on anxiety medication because that was the only way that I could manage anxiety. I didn't have anxiety until I started in Ediscovery, if I'm honest. And the only thing that I could like do to handle it while I was in there was taking medication. And so many people that I knew are on medication, but also like, what is that medication doing to me? It made me gain a ton of weight. It made me feel very unhealthy. I had sleeping problems. And it wasn't until I actually got out that I was able to like resolve those health issues. Like for me, the hidden workplace suffering is the things that actually like affect your physical, mental, and emotional health. And those are that I mean, people have died in this industry. Let's just be real about it. People have died at their desks. We have all heard the stories. You've seen, I like, there's been articles about it happening at specific firms that are super toxic. Like, we all know. Um, but it doesn't have to be this way. Like, it just doesn't have to be this way. So for me, like, the more overt things were hard to deal with. The misogyny from clients, from salespeople, from my coworkers, from my bosses. But usually it was like few and far between. It was the more constant, hidden
Mhm.
workplace suffering that over time degraded my health, my full body health, mind, body,
Mhm.
spirit. So,
Mhm. I'm with you there. I know, my last few years in Ediscovery, I saw a major decline in my health, my mental health and my physical health. Um, uh, I know I remember asking someone a few years ago, what do I do with all of this stress? And was told, like, I'm on Xanax. I mean, you can take medication. That's how I deal with it. Um, and it's striking for an industry to be so comfortable suggesting to people that they get on medication just so they can tolerate this job and the stress of the job, when I feel like at some point, as you rise in organizations, and become a leader that can effect change, that perhaps you just make it better so that people don't have to be. It sounds so simple, yet it's been very difficult to see. I've worked with some really wonderful people in this industry, really wonderful. I've worked for two really, larger vendors and a few law firms, and my experiences there were wonderful. Um, and not all vendors I work for, but in some of them that they were wonderful. I mean, great people want to care, but then again, there's always this fear of what's going to happen to me if I say no, what's going to happen to me if I push back. I mean, we are we're not going to get political on here, but we're in a time we're recording this is, a time, right before elections, and people during these times tend to focus on how it used to be, and people should focus on the family, and blah 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 blah. And I think about technostress and the fact that my parents went to work and came home, and if somebody at work needed them, they're gonna have to wait till the next day because there was no cell phone, there was no laptops for them to log into. Unless they called the house and they happened to be there or awake, they weren't gonna hear from them, right? And now here we are, unable to disconnect, like glued to our phone. I had a conversation with someone when I was in my 20s, and there was some like underground talk about how the government's gonna put microchips in everybody so they can track them, and it's like, no, there's no way I'm gonna let that happen to me. Mind you, we all have a cell phone. So I mean, there is a stress to that as well. Any discovery, you're always on. You can't, even if your phone is off, you're always on. You can be checking it. Dad, is this thing broken? How come I haven't seen an
sending
email?
yourself emails like
Right?
Oh,
test,
Like,
I've
that
done
test.
that.
is this right? I've
I've
totally
done
done that,
that.
right?
I've
Like,
done that.
oh.
Like, what is wrong with me? Nothing's happening and I can't stand it. I'm not
Did I
getting
get
over
fired?
like
Right, exactly. Logged in, there's no email in my inbox. Oh no, did I get fired last night? Like, what happened? I don't understand. Like, these things
Hmm.
are not normal.
we laugh,
Right.
but that is like literally one of the things they talk about is job insecurity. You know, like that's one of the reasons, and because everybody's afraid they're going to miss some email from some complete nut job of a client who is crazy and works around the clock, and then just somehow like you got lucky, you won the lotto, you got that case, and so now we expect you to work the same way that this Yahoo, who's
Mm.
probably like, I don't know, sniffing coke in the bathroom of his firm, is, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, we just, okay. We're just gonna ignore the drug and alcohol abuse that
No,
goes on in the
I
legal
I
mean,
profession.
mean,
it's
I
rampant.
mean,
It's
listen,
rampant.
I've dealt with I have dealt with clients where I have gotten off the phone or I have received an email and I'm like, what is this word salad and how much did you take? Like, what's going on? Like, and I think everybody has had that experience where you read an email from somebody and you're like, oh, you're not well. Like, what? Were you at happy hour or is this how you, like, what's going on?
mhm.
So, like, I feel like like if we can't take a step back, if we talk, Renee said she wants to talk about the origins of it. The urgency, I think, is a huge, for me, like one of my takeaways looking into workplace suffering and thinking about the things that I've been through, my biggest takeaway is like, one, it doesn't have to be this way. Two, urgency is killing everyone.
Mhm.
And three, people are doing 2 to 3 jobs and it's just happening. Like these places are completely understaffed. And really at the bottom line of it all, the root of it all is money and greed. That's my opinion.
I don't want to lose fact of to lose sight of the fact that some of the clients are suffering too, right? They're
Mhm.
in bad situations. The culture in their firms or corporate departments are run by people who, again, just believe in fear-based management, and I was crapped on, so you have to be too. This is just a way, this is how you move up. You have to thicken your skin. And there is a very, like, compassion is seen as weakness by a lot of people. And there's also a generation of folks, and I'm going to speak to the women now, who had to be jerks to get up and to move up and to be heard. um, that is starting to die down, so I don't actually know why some of them stay that way, but there's definitely a generational issue there as well, and just bad culture, bad uh bad tradition. But today the suffering can be avoided. And what I see, again, is just like this lack of responsibility by leadership at any level, at any type of organization, to model respect and compassion. This is the way it fixes itself. I have gotten on the phone with some clients who legit didn't know what they was doing,
Mm-hmm.
barking on the email, and then I get them on the phone and I'm like, okay, how can I help you? And I recall one woman just started crying. I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't slept in
Mhm.
2 days.
Mhm.
Now, that ain't real. I mean, that's not normal for her either, but I had compassion for her in that moment. I said, well, that's why I'm here to help you. And thank God my team is so awesome because they're about to help you too. Maybe stop yelling at them, right? Like, so I think one truth is that some people believe that their suffering is the only suffering that matters. And
Mhm.
that's just not the truth. And their actions, like, emulate that. My suffering is the only one that matters. If I have to be up here at 2 a.m., somebody needs to be here to answer that email. If the business believes that that's what they have to do to survive, there are ways around it. You can hire people in their own time zone to, you can model a business to support that, for sure. But you have to want to care, you have to care about your people enough to want to make changes like that. And there are organizations that do that. And then there are some that don't. There's some that try and fail. But we all have to come from a place of compassion and I mean, just human decency, so that we can recognize when people are suffering and stop pretending like you don't see it. It's there. It's staring you in the face. I had a breakdown at work, and yeah. I I don't believe that it was always handled properly, how I was to deal with that at work. I recall having a boss that was 100% supportive. Um, but unfortunately, that person doesn't work in Ediscovery anymore and can no longer be the champion that this industry needs, right? Um, so like, what do we do when the pressure pushes the good folks out, the ones who want to effect change? And I frankly put myself in that category. What do we do when those people's voice are muffled by, you know, folks who could care less about the psychological safety of its employees? What do we do? Right? I mean, Jill, I mean, what do you think?
Get on board or get dragged. That's what I say. This
For
Gen
real.
Z is gonna.
Well,
These leaders have no idea what they're in for.
I mean, this is the direction it's going, right? I mean, like, it is very obvious to me that this is the direction it's going. Like, all you need to do is be on LinkedIn a little bit and you can see the tone of the conversation. I don't think it's the change is not taking hold in a real transformative way yet, but it's only a matter of time.
Mhm.
You know, as I sit and listen to both of you speak on this, I think what I want to offer is an alternative perspective, which is that everyone is suffering. Even the assholes are suffering. They may not know it, they may not show it, but their behavior is evidence of it,
Mhm.
right? And I think for me, where I'm at in my life journey and how I understand, you know, the human experience, I would say that compassion asks us to hold space for them too. To recognize where harm has been done, right? It's compassion is not about being a doormat,
Right.
right? Compassion holds people accountable, but what compassion doesn't do is exclude them. And so it's a calling in instead of a calling out. And I think that telling these stories from personal experience of some of the crazy stuff that happens is important, and it validates people who are experiencing it, right? It says, I see you, I understand your experience, I know what that feels like. And if you can't speak to it, I will speak on your behalf, which is what we're doing here. That's the reason we're here. And the only reason we feel we can do is because none of us are in it anymore, or at least not for the moment. That's why we have the freedom to have these conversations, because nobody is holding a paycheck over our heads, right? Nobody's going to call us on Monday and tell us we
Mhm.
said something wrong, right? But I would offer that this industry, as it's been operating, is deeply sick
Mhm.
and it affects everyone. And I think the reason it's not changing is because nobody knows what to do to change it, right? It is like, well, this is what I went through. This is how it is that I get paid X dollar amount, right? As a project manager, most project managers make pretty decent money. You know, a lot of them are in the six figures, not high six figures, but low six figures. And that, there is like this expectation that if I make a certain amount of money, then I got to deal with a certain amount of shit. And I think that like we really need to, well, maybe not me. I don't actually need to do this. But the people who are in it, my recommendation would be, especially the people who are in senior positions, who, whether they care about this issue or not is besides the point, to really look inward and think about, like, what kind of experience do you want to have at work? Because I'm going to guess that you're not having a good time either. Those clients who are yelling at people are not having a good time, right? They're not doing well. They're not feeling well. They're feeling overworked, right? Like, I am not willing to accept, Becky, that there are just like psychopaths, right? Like that people are just like mean to be mean. And I I firmly can admit that, like, that is I could be wrong about that, right? This is my loving heart speaking. My heart that like wants to believe everybody has good intentions. And I recognize that in some ways that's naive, but I think that's where we have to start. I think we have to start at a place where we look at somebody who is perpetuating suffering in whatever way that is, right? Maybe they're not taking responsibility for it, maybe they're not changing the situation for people underneath them, whatever. And really see that maybe they don't know how, and that is the only reason why they can't change it, right? This is what they've been doing, this is what they've learned, this is what they've been conditioned to do, and they don't know how to change it. It doesn't make it okay, but it does give us a place where we can say, okay guys, well, like, hey, how's it going for you? Because you seem like you're not doing well, right? I know I'm not doing well. This person over here is, losing their shit. I'm talking them off the ledge every day. So if everybody's having a bad time, this party sucks. What are we doing?
Everybody's burned out, no one's going to see it. That's the problem, right?
Right.
So everyone's burned out, and everybody thinks that their little piece of suffering is more important than the other person suffering, even though, in some respect, when you're in e-discovery, your client, you're all on the same team. And yet that is not necessarily how most projects operate. And that brings yet another level of stress. So, I mean, clearly there are, well, maybe not so clearly because nothing's changed. So, there are definitely alternatives to this type of behavior. What has to happen is that people need buy-in. We need people on the ground, frontline folks, to want to change, to recognize that they have power
Mm-hmm.
and that the paycheck that they're receiving doesn't pay for them to have to be on medication, abusing anything just to stay awake or um, present for the client at the expense of their family or their mental health or their physical health. Um, and that there's some level of coaching that can be provided to help people, especially those who are like new to leadership, because we could talk about that too.
The whole episode. That's
Yeah, because that too, like it contributes to some of the suffering of the staff, right? Of the PMs who, end up with a manager that's just like not good with people. But like God bless them, they just were never taught how to compassionately lead. And, I know that's something that we can all provide, but then there needs to be buy-in. Um, I don't want to neglect, though, going back to something I think you said, Becky, about covert suffering, and or maybe it was Joe. I don't, uh, as the person of color on this call, I want to say something for. So this is Ava. Okay, goodbye.
Hey,
I want to say
girl.
something for the people of color who may be listening. Um, I see you. I'm not, as a leader, I recognized and experienced, um, people, clients, coworkers being a little extra, asking about your her, asking about, or making reference to things that they assume about your culture, and maybe saying something about the way you speak and the code switching that has to happen, or that you think has to happen, which again is more stress that you take with you. So before you even open up your mouth, if you're in a meeting, if you have to speak before you've opened up your mouth, um, it is the truth that people have already made some assumptions about
Mhm.
you, what's going to come out, the my favorite thing about being Jamaican is I have family who like looks Chinese, and when they speak, it freaks people out. But I think I'm saying that to say you can't judge a book by its cover, yet that happens so often when you're a person of color in this industry. And I know that a lot of people that I have recruited over the years um, were looking forward to working with someone like me that could recognize those things and those extra stresses that you can't really explain
Mhm.
to not a person who's not of color, right? And like I see you, and I know that there's some coaching that can help you navigate those microaggressions that you might be experiencing at work. All of that stuff leads to more stress. And that stress leads to suffering. And if you're underperforming one day because somebody had just said something to you on a call that you can't, isn't like totally racist, but like it's right there,
Mhm.
and you're the only person like, did I just hear that? And nobody else can hear it because right. And people want to make you think you're crazy. You're not crazy.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
hear that we understand.
Mhm.
And yeah, we need more leaders who are willing to stand up for people, especially if you're, a minority and a woman, right? Also a minority, but because there's an understanding there that it's just really it's not something you can teach. Um,
Mhm.
and anyway, I wanted to say that because I feel like a lot of people want to be righteous and say that they're down and all of that, and I get that. And some people really are connected in a way that they recognize when they've wronged someone or they've inadvertently said something that was off-putting. But there's a whole bunch of people out there who like legit don't care.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
I remember getting on a phone call with a client, and I stayed off camera for a while, and then I got on camera, and dude was like, "Oh, I didn't know." And I was like, "You didn't know what?" I was just leaned it like, "You didn't know what?" And he was like, nothing." And I thought, "Oh, I guess my corporate voice was really, really good, but I know what I mean, was I
Yeah.
supposed to like speak any Ebonics and that's the only, like I tricked you, like this is the only way you knew? Like stuff like that is real and
Mhm.
really disappointing when it exists in the legal industry, but it exists.
Whew.
Um,
Yes.
and it's worse for our Indian brothers and sisters, our Asian
Mhm.
brothers and sisters. God forbid you have an accent that is
Yep.
to mask. There's a lot of that. And again, like leaders, I implore you, that is adding stress to your team that they can't really talk to you about. So
If I may
yes, please.
speak to the white people,
Yeah. Please do. Somebody needs to.
here's the thing. It You don't need to validate or prove to be true what somebody's lived experience tells them it is, right? If one of your, direct reports or a coworker, someone on your team, someone in your life even comes to you and says, "This is what happened to me and this is how I feel about it and I'm experiencing this," then you don't second guess them. There's no point to that, right? You don't know what it's like to live in their body and have the experience that they have in this country, right? And it really is irrelevant anyway, because what compassion tells us is we interrupt suffering wherever we can. And so if someone comes to you and says, I am suffering, XYZ thing happened to me. I dealt with somebody who said a racist thing to me. I dealt with somebody who is treating me bad because I'm a woman. The proper response is, what can I do to support you? How can I help you with this? What do you need from me? Right? It is not, oh no, I think you misread it. No, no, that's not what happened. Don't do that. Do not do that. You don't even need to go there, right?
Right.
Someone is saying to you, I am suffering. Your response should be, how can I help you with this? What can I do to support you? That's it. It's easy. This is very easy. When you overcomplicate it, that's when you go wrong. That's when
Right.
it goes all the way wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, Renee, what
In
is your
leadership, and especially if you're in
yes,
resources, no, gotta say it.
HR?
Gotta say it.
Yes.
That's
I
the
mean,
that's the that's why people are afraid to speak up.
what do you agree with that, Renee? Like, do you agree
100%.
with what I just said?
100%. I'm gonna give you an example. Can't use names on this, and we never will, just so you know, for
Mm-hmm.
our listener. Um, I had an employee once who had some workplace trauma that they had not sort of overcome, and ended up in a situation where they were done, and um, misspoke, and felt really bad about it. And when I reported what had happened to my boss, like I needed to, um, there was like, well, what do you think we should do about this? And I said, well, I think we need to let this person know that we support them, but whatever they want to do next, I think they probably just need to do that. This person wanted to just leave. Now, at the time, it was going to be real rough if they just left. But the person was in so much pain, it was evident. So I told the person, whatever you want to do, I support you. Because that's what you're supposed to do as a leader. It is not that person's problem that the company didn't have enough people to support the clients if that person was no longer there. It is not that person's responsibility to replace them. It is not that person's responsibility to cover for them. It's just not. It was my responsibility to make sure that that person knew that I could see they were a human being and that they needed
Mm-hmm.
support and help. So that's what I did. Now,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make me saintly,
No.
but it makes me more connected to the people that were in my charge. And I want to say that that's part of the issue with some organizations where you see a lot of burnout happening and a lot of silent suffering and quiet quitting because people are too afraid to stand up for themselves, to speak up when they're feeling harm at work. I was a bit of a unicorn. And I know that I'm not alone. There are definitely people out there. I'm a big up, like, some people at Lighthouse I know that are definitely trying to lead the charge, and at Epic too. But there's definitely a lack of um, compassionate leadership that has evolved into this like abyss of silent suffering that some leaders will say is just part of the job, and it's a lie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for watching our second episode, part one, Workplace Suffering, Unmasking the Realities of Ediscovery. Please be sure to check out part two, coming out soon. It's been our honor to share our stories, perspectives, and ideas with you in this episode. We offer it to you from a place of care and concern, with a deep desire to plant the seeds of transformation towards greater well-being for everyone. Whether we reach one person or thousands, our efforts here will be worth it. If you have stories to share or are in need of additional support and we can help, fill out the form linked in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. On behalf of Jill, Renee, and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.